to start today by I had really 4 objectives for the afternoon, and the first one was to congratulate the NSWA on the completion and the release of the IWMP. This is, I think, a very important milestone in the management of the basin, and a very, very significant accomplishment, and one that, as an association, I hope everybody feels very proud and good about. The second objective that I had, and perhaps this is the most important one, and that's to thank the NSWA for its support and leadership during the development and implementation of the water management framework for the Industrial Heartland Capital Region. This framework was created by stakeholders, and we are now in the 5th year of its implementation. And I want to single out, I hope they don't mind, Les, Gammy, and Gord Thompson in particular have been generous in sharing their knowledge and experience about the North Saskatchewan and about, in particular, the operation of municipal facilities, but just their experience and knowledge generally during the design of the framework, but also the execution of all aspects. And so I'd like to think that the NSWA's fingerprints through their involvement and others is always on the water management framework. And I think the other thing that's happened as a result of their support, it's spurred on others to try to reach the same levels of enthusiasm, for sure. And the result has been that we now have an exceptional suite of products available, and I think an unprecedented commitment to collaborate in the capital region. I'll explain a little bit more about that as we go on. I think the third objective that I had was to highlight the important role that the NSWA plays in NSR water management and the stakeholder conversations that support policy advice. I'll just give you one example. The water quality objectives that the NSWA drafted are really one of the most fundamental and foundational pieces of the implementation of the water management framework. They have become the cornerstone of the load management conversations that are now occurring, and I wanted to thank them for this good work and to say that without what you have done, we would not be where we are today. And then the final thing is, the final thing that I wanted to do was to provide a very brief snapshot of the water management framework and how implementation is proceeding, with an emphasis on baseline science monitoring and the tools that have been developed. A lot has been achieved in the past 5 years, and all you'll get is a flavor of the water management framework. But I want to make the offer that we're quite happy to provide more detail to any group or individual moving forward. So that wasn't my intention today to get into the granular specifics, but we're quite happy to do that. And I think there is, as you'll see, a lot of opportunity for much more technical conversations. So next slide, please. And this is really just the introduction, because stating the obvious, but over the course of the work, what I found out as both the manager of capital, the Capital Region Cumulative Effects Program, and probably more importantly as the chair of the Water Management Framework Implementation Committee, that there are some things that the region and the citizens hold to be quite true, and that is that the quality of water is very important to everyone. That consumption of water by residents and by industry is equally concerning to all those people who live and work in this area. And then the third point, which is what I've already said, is that a multi-stakeholder created the water management framework and are implementing it. So next slide. This is just the cover sheet of the water management framework, released in December of 2007, created in the fall of 2007. I think that most people will remember in 2007, the time period, the economy was red hot. We had a lot of industrial activity on the very immediate horizon. and there was a need for action, and as well for the people that were well informed about the water quality of North Saskatchewan. They knew that there were issues that needed attention. So from the very beginning, looking at the vision statement, you can see from the very beginning this water management framework took what I refer to as a triple bottom line approach, and that the environment, the social and economic aspects of development were all part of it. So from the very beginning, it's always been about integration. It, as well, it is one framework that's part of a suite of activities in the capital region that support the capital region growth plan. And there are other frameworks on air quality, for example, and elemental sulfur, as well as a number of smaller studies that support the overall addressing of growth pressure in the region. It's also an example, as it has turned out, of a sub-regional plan that will ultimately inform the North Saskatchewan regional plan. And when this framework was created, the land use framework was still an idea that was intended, and actually when this framework was released, it actually predates some of the work of the capital region growth plan. However, it was always intended to be a model that could be used, or that those plans could look at us as and be informed by. I think I wasn't intending to go through the details of what's in the framework. It's a pretty typical framework in the sense that it does have vision, objectives, and a number of criteria by which you would judge the success of implementation activities. It's regional. It's comprehensive in the sense that it addresses withdrawal, treatment, and discharge of water. It considers a suite of parameters. It includes industrial and municipal sources and sectors. It includes existing operations and contemplates new facilities when they arrive. Because of the size of that challenge, it includes phased implementation, and it includes consideration of point source and non-point sources. However, the focus has been on the point sources in the first 5 years. Next slide, please. This is just the schematic of the area, concentrated on the area from Devon, Can, well known to you. Sometimes asked, why did you pick those two spots? Pretty practical, really. They were the spots where we had 2 long-term monitoring stations. And as well, although the focus is in this area, from the very outset, it was designed with the region, the basin in mind, and so as you'll see later on, a lot of the work that's been done, both in the modeling and the science part, has, okay, sorry, has taken a headwaters to border approach. And as well, I've mentioned this already, however, can't emphasize it enough, is that the reason that the point sources were the initial focus was because of all of this activity and the fact that the water quality, and this was a historic fact, was known to be lower at Pecan than at Devon, and so the desire, this is long-standing direction actually, to improve the water quality in the North Saskatchewan River. Next slide, please. A little bit about how we work together. There's an implementation steering committee. These are the members of the steering committee, organizations that are represented: Capital Region Wastewater Commission, Environment and Sustainable Development. We have, because of the interest in finance and triple bottom line, we have representatives from the Treasury Board and Finance Department. I think the more important members are these ones. The reason that these are top is this is just simply an alphabetical list. If I were actually doing this, I would put these at the bottom. The really important ones are these groups here, which are the major stakeholders in the region, and there's been strong support from all of them. I've mentioned just in terms of the number of people on the committee, we have 4 industrial representatives seats at the table. And we also have had 3 major subcommittees from this implementation steering committee. One is on baseline science, one is on engineering, one has been on what we refer to as governance and management of physical assets. This is just, we have a lot of assets in the region, and a group that was looking at how they were governed. Fourth subcommittee would be on communications. We found that there's a lot of information related to the North Saskatchewan River itself, but also when you start to tie in municipal, industrial issues in here, it becomes a question about how does this all fit together and what are we doing becomes a challenge. So we've got a communication group. I just mentioned that there are members of the steering committee in the room here today, and when you look at this, I just say if you look at this, many of the organizations and actually some of the individuals that are represented on the NSWA are in this group too. So I like to think of the NSWA as us, and I hope that the people in here think of that as us as well. This next slide, please. This is really just re-emphasizing what I've already said, which is basically the contributions of the NSWA. And I think that when you think about this, I don't know how widely known it is outside of the steering committee, but I think this represents a significant contribution both personally and organizationally. Next step. Next slide. In terms of where are we headed next, and in particular, where we believe the NSWA's continued participation is essential. You know, obviously some of the things that we've talked about today already, certainly in the science and monitoring area, lots of conversations to continue on management objectives and how we continue to manage the loads in the system, about how do we, the strategies for managing load across a wide range of flows. I think we now have sufficient baseline information across both to look at the flow and the duration curves or load duration curves to think that they're really fundamentally 2 different strategies. And I don't think these are a surprise for people that are working there, but there's a strategy that deals with medium and low flows and the influence of point sources, and then there's another strategy that obviously we need to put in place to deal with the high flows. But those are evident, and that's work that I think both the NSWA has identified, and it's also work that the Water Management Framework Steering Committee is aware of. I think the other area that we haven't had much conversation about, but this is an area where I believe the NSWA and groups like it are experts, and we're an important thing moving ahead is just how do we keep stakeholders continually engaged and informed about the work that's ongoing and the things that they can do to assist in the management of the system. Next slide, please. These are the more detailed slides. I'll leave a copy of the presentation. So what I intended here was not to review each one of these in detail, but simply to this is simply to give you an idea of the scope of the work that's ongoing. And while there's always room for improvement, I think this represents, the next 2 or 3 slides represent a significant effort by all parties over the last 5 years. So it goes from, and I want to have obviously the long-term river monitoring network and continuous recorders that exist throughout the basin. There have been synoptic and time of travel surveys. Obviously the city of Edmonton and EPCOR, major programs in the North Saskatchewan for some considerable period of time, and all other approval holders have monitoring requirements for sure. So this is more of a historic look, although and these continue on into the future. I think what we found in 2007 is the first question we were asked, what are the conditions of the North Saskatchewan River, and was there a baseline or benchmark that we could easily refer to? And so, go to the next slide. And this is work that has been undertaken through the Water Management Framework since 2007 to address the question of baseline and a number of other questions that were on mind. Initially, as I mentioned, this was about the baseline. The early priority was to better understand the chemistry and hydrology of North Saskatchewan. That baseline is in place, and as that baseline became more well-defined, then the focus could start to shift more to the ecosystem responses. And I just want to point out that there is still and continues to be quite a bit of work ongoing in 2012, and in some of these studies, the work that we did in the early stages of the framework, say for example on these time of travel surveys, those are being repeated, and I think that's consistent with advice that would come from the NSWA, at least from some of the work that I've seen on the monitoring work that you've been talking about. Just point out, although it's not widely known, there is some work that's been undertaken on tributaries and non-point sources, and I think most people know that there's a considerable amount of work that's been done on combined sewers and stormwaters in the city of Edmonton. You'll hear more about that this afternoon. And I'll just say that we would expect that more point source, non-point source work would be done in the future. This is a lot of work. And we found as a steering committee that very highly technical. And so there is a synthesis of these studies that's been prepared, and it'll be available shortly. And also include, if there's information that people would like or further information on these studies, then they should contact Darcy McDonald or Curtis Brock of the department for more detail. And I think that, as many of the steering committee members that are here today will know, we've had a lot of detailed conversation about what these means, and I think that those kind of conversations and presentations by Darcy and Curtis and others, if other organizations would like to have a similar kind of a presentation, I think people are happy to do that. Okay, final slide. This is on the tools, and I'm not a tool expert, so I'll just tell you, don't ask me to name all the acronyms, but I do know that there are people in the audience that could name them if we get down to that. The point here is really that in 2007 we needed to improve the tools. There were some existing tools underway, but these are tools that have been developed. I'm just highlighting a couple because they were necessary to upgrade these things so we could have this load management conversation. So you couple these tools with the water quality objectives that the NSWA developed, and you have really the basis for having a quite informed and detailed conversation. So just a couple of things: improved main stem model on hydrology and water quality. Headwaters to border can use existing conditions and predictive scenarios to look at those against water quality guidelines and objectives, and in fact that's been done. Associated with that is an add-on piece. I would describe it, I don't know if a modeler would describe it that way, but I would say it's an add-on piece to look at the mixing zones and edge of the plumes, the cormix. This is kind of an interesting piece here because there is a regional constituent and water balance for all the facilities in the capital region, so there's over 30 of them. And this is I think this is the first time that we've had, and maybe the first time in Alberta, where you've had a single mass balance can look at all of these. What makes this interesting is you can look at and predict the future. There's some placeholders in there for new facilities, and you can use this balance. Obviously, when you start to do this, and someone mentioned already, there's data gaps. When we started to look at this, there's probably some opportunities to improve that. And one of the things from a data perspective that we imagine would be done would be to improve the quality of information. The other thing that relates, when I've spoken to this before, the load evaluations, and there's a number of things in there's a little toolbox and that's been developed to look at loads to from the North Saskatchewan tributaries and point sources. And there have been, this is a way of looking at the loads. It's a way of dealing with some of the gaps in the data that exist right now and some uncertainty. So I would say we've got pretty good understanding of the load duration curves, certainly in the capital region for now. Associated with that, as well as a little toolbox, includes a load duration curve calculator, because if you have a model and you need to have these in there, you need to have a way of getting it in there simply, so that's been done and built. And then we're working on, and really the last one is really more of a spreadsheet that enables us to take the Alberta Protocol for Protection of Aquatic Life and use doing a calculator to look at that, so that can be inputted into the model as well.